The NFL schedule drops later this week, so we're going to break down the biggest challenge each Buffalo Bills opponent presents right now.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome in, folks. On today's episode, we're going to break down each of the Bills' opponents and identify the single biggest challenge that they present to the Buffalo Bills and what function of the Buffalo Bills the onus is on to overcome that challenge. So the Bills play 14 different teams. Of course, they're divisional rivals twice each, and then you have the remaining teams on your schedule. So we're going to break down all 14 teams and really just identify what that challenge is and who the onus is on for the Bills to overcome it. So we'll start with the AFC East. Then we'll work through the rest of the AFC opponents and finish things off with the NFC slate. Yesterday, we went through my wish list for the 2026 schedule. And then on our next episode, we'll talk about the quarterback matchups that exist on the 2026 schedule for the Buffalo Bills. But let's start with the Miami Dolphins. And I think the biggest challenge that the Miami Dolphins present is De'Von Achane, their outstanding running back, who is a very multifaceted weapon. Of course, not only can he run the ball and present an explosive threat, he can catch it too. And he's certainly had some production against the Buffalo Bills. And obviously, Miami has a lot of questions this year. That's year one of a major, major rebuild. And it's going to take some time for their roster to really become what they want it to. And so there's a lot of holes on this Dolphins roster, but I think their collection of offensive line talent plus De'Von Achane really positions Achane to be productive. And Malik Willis, now their quarterback, is a dual threat guy with really, really high-end running skill. And so that backfield tandem could be pretty potent. And certainly Achane's the established player here. Now, the question that I'll have for Miami is, while you do have Achane, do you have enough in the passing game that's going to draw attention away from every team showing up and saying, my goodness, Achane's the biggest problem they present. We need to do everything we can to slow it down and dare you to have success in other ways against the defense? Yeah, of course, I think that'll be the case. But when I think Miami, I think Achane and him being the biggest challenge for the Buffalo Bills. And the onus here, and as I work through the onus part of these conversations, I want to avoid coaching as much as possible, because of course I can just say, oh, well, Jim Leonard's got to figure that out. And a lot of times that's true, but I want to focus more on players. And so this comes down to the front seven on defense for me, where whether it's your front and your down lineman being really, really gap sound and dealing with a big physical Miami Dolphins offensive line, or the second level being assignment sound and not overrunning gaps and, filling correctly. I think that's where your onus is going to be on this defensive front seven to overcome the challenges that De'Von Achane presents with the Miami Dolphins. Let's go to the New England Patriots. The biggest challenge to me with New England is their secondary. They have a great corner tandem of Christian Gonzalez and Carlton Davis, a good slot player in Marcus Jones. They added Kevin Byard to the mix this offseason, who's a ball-hawking safety with good size. He's a good tackler as well. And then Craig Woodson's a very steady veteran. It's a very, very complete group. And because of what they have at corner, they can play man coverage and trust their guys to hold up. And last year, the Bills really didn't have receiver talent that could stress this group in any way, shape, or form. Hopefully, DJ Moore's arrival gives the Bills more of an opportunity to do that. But that's a very, very complete secondary. And I still think there's plenty of questions about their pass rush. But they've added to this, like I mentioned, in Kevin Byard. And this is a defense last year in New England that held their last 11 opponents under 200 passing yards. And I think it's a better group this year that obviously now has more time on task together. So I think their biggest challenge is the secondary. And to me, the onus for the Bills is on the wide receivers. This group of receivers has got to do a better job stressing these corners than what we saw last year. And DJ Moore is obviously your clearest path to doing that. You're hopeful that Keon Coleman can take a step in year 3. Josh Palmer can be healthy. We'll see how Skylar Bell factors in. But the receivers being better is going to be critical for the Bills to overcome the challenge that the Patriots secondary presents. Let's move to the Jets. Obviously, another team in the division that is overhauling its roster. They traded a lot of their best players for draft picks. They've now picked some players. They have more picks coming next year. They have a lot of cap space next year. But I think the best function of this Jets team is probably their offensive line. They have 2 high picks at tackle and Olu Fashanu at the left tackle and Armand Membu at right tackle. They both look really good. Joe Tippmann is a quality interior offensive lineman. They signed Dylan Parham in free agency to come and play left guard. They have a good center in Josh Myers. And so I think that's what it is. And because they have that offensive line, I think it frees them up to be a team that can run it and a team that can throw it. They have a Geno Smith now at quarterback, which is a much more serviceable player than they've had. And I think just collectively the floor of that roster has increased, which is not hard to do based on what they put on the field last year. But offensively and defensively, it's a better football team. But at its core, I think the offensive line is the single best part of it. And I think that's the biggest challenge that the Jets present. And so I think the onus for the Bills to overcome that challenge is their defensive line and their edge rushers and being able to be disruptive and, create some negative plays and put that offense in tough situations. So the challenge for the Jets to me is the offensive line. The onus is on the Bills defensive line to overcome it. All right, let's get one more AFC opponent in here. Let's go to the Baltimore Ravens, the standalone game that the Bills have against the AFC North this year. And it's pretty obvious what the challenge is here. It's that backfield tandem of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. Now, there's some turnover with that interior offensive line. They have a new coaching staff. Declan Doyle is now their offensive coordinator, who is different than Todd Monken. And so we'll see how it all comes together. But it's still Lamar Jackson. It's still Derrick Henry. And those guys are still really good, especially together. They present a lot of problems, right? A lot of problems. And so the onus is on the Bills' defensive front seven to overcome it and tackle and be gap sound. Obviously a big task for Jim Leonard as well, but the players that got to show up and get it done are in that defensive front seven. All right, so the AFC East and the Ravens have been covered. Coming up next, we'll go through the AFC West and the Houston Texans. So, folks, be sure to stick with me. Workplace chaos deadlines are stacking up. The inbox is overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed, sponsored jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for, skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. All right, we are continuing our conversation, identifying the biggest challenge that each 2026 opponent presents. And of course, on Thursday, we get the schedule and we'll get to see exactly how it plays out, what order the games are, what time they're going to be played. Next up, the Houston Texans. I feel like the Texans are becoming the opponent that the Bills Mafia at least wants to see the Bills play. And obviously it's been a challenging place, especially going to Houston. That defense is awesome. And look, I want to be very specific with my answers, but I think I just have to say the defense. I think it's a special defense. They have high-end talent at all levels of the field, but in particular, their edge rushers. I mean, Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, that's crazy good. And then this secondary is just loaded. Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter at corner. That's an awesome pair. Jalen Petrie in the slot. Kalen Bullock is a ball-hawking free safety, and now they've added Reed Blankenship to the mix. Good start and safety from the Eagles comes over in free agency. It's a loaded defense. And so I think the onus here is really the Bills' offensive tackles. You could talk Josh Allen. You could talk receivers. You can, of course, mention the coaching element. But how well Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown can hold up against Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson is going to be telling. And last year, it didn't go well. And it felt like Dawkins maybe played through a concussion. And it certainly, we know Spencer Brown played through some type of shoulder deal that really affected him. And not being at your best when you're playing those guys is really tough. But ultimately, we've seen two games now, the last two games where the Bills just, everything was so hard on offense. And it felt like Josh Allen was just under consistent duress. So there's a lot of layers to it, but the biggest one to me, offensive tackles. Deion Dawkins, Spencer Brown, handsomely paid tackles, veterans, established dudes. You got to be better. You got to be better this time around against these guys to give Josh Allen and company the best opportunity to score against a great defense. Next up is the Kansas City Chiefs. I think the biggest challenge to me is still Patrick Mahomes. I know that this offense hasn't been what it's been, right? It's been a league average to below average scoring offense the last 3 years. It's still Mahomes, right? And I think they're trying to figure out their formula. I have questions about what they're doing. I would have a different approach to a lot of things. But Mahomes is still that guy that can dice you up, figure it out in clutch moments, third downs. He's still that guy. We'll see what he looks like coming off of injury. But ultimately, it's Mahomes. And part of that is that I don't really look at the rest of the operation and think, oh my God, there's so much to deal with. There's holes on the offensive line. I think they have questions about the receivers. Kelsey is not Kelsey. Are they going to use Kenneth Walker to run the ball like they need to? That's been Andy Reid's problem. He's not committed to running the football. He's looking for all these solutions to beat two high safeties and doing everything but just consistently running the ball. They want to get speed at receiver, verticality. They want to run screens and quick passes. Just run the ball. I hope they don't. I really do. I hope they don't. But that's been Andy Reid's problem for like his whole career. And I know the problem, air quotes, Super Bowls, I get it. But Super Bowls came for Andy Reid at the peak of the NFL, going to a pace and space style with, heavy wide receiver formations and taking advantage of defenses that didn't know how to play it. Yeah, I'm not surprised that Andy Reid's peak and Patrick Mahomes' peak came while he was ahead of that curve and defenses didn't know what to do. Well, now defenses know what to do, and he's been league average to below average. At the end of the day, it's still Mahomes, and the clutch factor, the experience, that's what gives me the biggest concern. The onus for the Bills is on the pass rush. I think it's always come down to pass rush. When the Bills can get pressure on Patrick Mahomes, they have success. When they don't, the guy kills the Bills defense. Now, obviously, it's a different day, right? It's Jim Leonard. It's no longer Sean McDermott. It's different style, different types of players, different players. So I think the story is certainly in a new chapter. Mahomes is the biggest challenge. The pass rush is where the onus is on for the Bills to get it done. Let's go to the Chargers next. I was looking through the Chargers, and I don't think there's any single element that really pops where you say, oh my goodness, how are they going to deal with that player or that function of the team? I think it's a solid all-around football team, but what really stood out to me in examining the Chargers in advance of this conversation is that they just have a lot of variety with their skill sets on offense, right? You talk about an NFL that wants to create mismatches, the Chargers just have a lot of guys that present challenges with size and speed. Some of them just speed. But just look at it. At wide receiver, they have Quentin Johnson, who's a height, weight, speed specimen. Trey Harris, height, weight, speed. Ladd McConkey, shifty, speedy, very complete player. Keandre Lambert-Smith, height, weight, speed. Brendan Thompson ran a 4.26. Darius Davis is another 4.3 guy. That's all at receiver. At tight end, they just signed David Njoku, who's a freak. Arande Gatson, who's a mismatch, big power slot, ball skills down the field. At running back, they have a downhill physical player in Omarion Hampton, who they picked in the first round of 2025. They signed Keaton Mitchell, who's more of a slasher, speedy type back. And then it's Justin Herbert, who has, unlimited physical ability on the field to do whatever he wants. And then Mike McDaniel, who's, a pretty creative offensive mind. So it's to me, it's just all of that, right? Like, we have mismatched players in our skill positions. We have Justin Herbert, who's a unlimited quarterback, and now we have Mike McDaniel running this offense. I think that whole formula becomes challenging. So the onus to me is on Jim Leonard, which I don't want to just say coaching, right? Because I think that's kind of getting away from what I really want to get into. But for this example, it has to be. You have all this variety now with your back seven personnel, your secondary talent, all these different skill sets. All right, here you go. Like, this is what I want to see. You got mismatch potential against you. Use all these different players that you have and show us why you have them. That's what I want to see. You can play these matchups. You have erasers. Put it all together. I'm very fascinated to find that one out. All right, let's go to the Denver Broncos, the reigning number 1 seed in the AFC. The biggest challenge to me with Denver is their pass rush. And I would say scheme is a huge part of it. They're a very good blitzing team. Their pressure looks are very good. And then, of course, they have good players. Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, Zach Allen. Those are really good rushers, and then they have some depth to it, and they have good corners. So it's a heck of a combination of good scheme, good rushers, good corners that allows you to be a good pass rush. The onus is on the offensive line and the Bills' protection schemes to handle it. The Bills have obviously done pretty well against Denver's defense over the last few years. And, of course, they blew them out 2 years ago. Last year, Bills couldn't get out of their own way, but it wasn't because they couldn't move the ball and score points. But that pass rush is the piece that has the ability to tilt a game, right? So that's what the Bills have to deal with. I think it comes down to the offensive line and protection schemes to handle that. The last AFC opponent is the Raiders. Raiders, obviously a work in progress, right? We kind of talked about the Jets and the Dolphins as teams that are works in progress. Same's true for the Raiders. They just had the number 1 pick in the draft, and they got, Mendoza. But the player that they have but don't want to have, I suppose, because they tried to trade him, is Max Crosby. I still think that's the single best part of this football team is Max Crosby. And I think they've done better this year to support him. I know they, of course, tried to sign Christian Wilkins, and that fell on their face. But I think their depth at edge rusher is as good as it's been in a while outside of Crosby. So, of course, they bring back Malcolm Koonce, who's a good player, but they signed Kwity Paye. They drafted Kieran Crawford at the on day 2. I think that stable of rushers is as good as I've seen for the Raiders in a while. And that collection, plus, they've invested in the linebacker position. They traded for Taron Johnson. They've made additions to their defense with some draft picks as well. They have a good interior rusher in Adam Butler. So it's Max Crosby, but it's who Max Crosby is, plus how they've added around him that I think could unlock even more playmaking from Max Crosby. So the onus here is offensive line. I know that Crosby's mostly on the defensive left side, so that means Spencer Brown would draw that assignment. And I think the offensive line and protection schemes and how they handle Crosby and what's now around him is where the biggest challenge is, and who the onus is on for Buffalo to overcome it. All right, coming up next, the Bills have 5 games against the NFC, including the Rams, the Bears, the Lions, the Packers. Let's talk about the biggest challenge they present and the onus for Buffalo to overcome it. Folks, be sure to stick with me. We can stream anything, order food in minutes, do everything from our phones, and somehow buying tickets to a live event still feels way harder than it should be. Long lines, confusing checkout, prices jumping at the last second. It shouldn't be this complicated. And that's why there is Game Time. It gives fans the advantage and makes getting tickets fast and simple. I was actually just looking at tickets for an upcoming game, and it took me just a few minutes to find great options. I could see the full price up front, no surprise fees at checkout. The seat views are huge. You can check your exact view before you purchase. In zone deals, that's awesome. It's where you pick the section and you can save even more. 2 taps, you have great seats locked in. It's quick, it's easy, and it actually makes you want to go to more events. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets to every type of event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. All right, welcome back, folks. Let's talk through the NFC opponents for the Bills and identify the biggest challenge they present and what function of the Bills the onus is on to overcome it. Let's go to the Rams. Bills get to play the Rams this year. Biggest challenge, and I think there's a lot. I think the Rams have an argument to be the best team on paper entering the season. Well coached, they got good talent everywhere. I would say the biggest challenge, though, is their passing offense. How could you not after watching the Bills the last time they played the Rams? Matthew Stafford lit up the Bills secondary. Bills had no answer for Puka Nacua. Cooper Kupp lit them up, but they don't have Kupp anymore. They probably have a better player in Davante Adams. They're working in these tight ends. They got like 5 tight ends that can play. They have a good pass pro back in Kyron Williams, and of course the reigning NFL MVP in Matthew Stafford, who's awesome. It's a lot to deal with. So to me, the onus for the Bills to overcome this is on the corners. You gotta put your big boy britches on and go to work. You gotta deal with Puka. You gotta deal with Davante Adams. Now, I guess the good news is they don't have much depth at receiver outside of those guys. Like Jordan Whittington's probably their next guy. But as ancillary pieces, those guys can flash. And obviously, their main guys command a lot. And when Stafford's on a heater, good luck. Now, again, like I said with the Chiefs, it's a new chapter, right? It's a new era. It's Jim Leonard running this defense. It's a lot of different players. But it's going to be tough to get those images out of my head of those receivers just making play after play after play and Stafford making throw after throw after throw. Next up is the Detroit Lions. A lot of A-list talent on that Detroit Lions team, and obviously they're coming off of a disappointing season. Injuries on defense continues to kill them. But I still look at Detroit and I think, all right, what's the hardest part of this team? You could mention Aiden Hutchinson, who I think is just a phenomenal football player. But it's Jahmyr Gibbs. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is like maybe the most dynamic offensive weapon in the NFL. You just see him with the ball in his hands, and he's one of those players you just hold your breath because I feel like he is so dynamic. And, Amon-Ra St. Brown's awesome. Sam Laporta's awesome. Penei Sewell. You got players on defense, but Gibbs is the one that gives me the most reservation. And partly because of the construction of the Bills. I don't know how equipped they are with this front seven to shut down a player like this. And so that's where my concern is. That's who I put the onus on. It's the defensive front seven. Can you be gap sound? Can you tackle? Can you be sound with your pursuit? Can you not get crossed up? Get to the football correctly? I think that's what Jahmyr Gibbs does in terms of stressing a defense. They got a good coordinator now in Drew Petzig taking this thing over. Then Gibbs is going to be a problem. It's on the front seven to overcome it. Next up, the Chicago Bears. I think the challenge with the Bears, and they were a challenging team to kind of figure out last year because there wasn't much on that team that actually performed consistently well. Like they had a really underwhelming defense. They had an underwhelming offense. There were times that offense looked like it couldn't do anything. There were times that Caleb Williams looked like one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. But the challenge is late game Caleb Williams. you can't deny what he did last year in those clutch moments, making just crazy throws in big moments where everything's on the line. And it doesn't matter how he looks for the first 50 minutes of the game. He can look like a pumpkin for 50 minutes. And then all of a sudden, 2 or 3 drives there at the end, the guy just makes crazy plays. I don't want to keep banging the same drum, but different chapter of the Bills, different defense, different coaching, different players. Boy, I'd be nervous about the Bills dealing with Caleb under the last defensive coaching staff. Hopefully this group can figure it out, but it's the late game Caleb Williams. I just don't know if there's a single function of this team that I look at and say, man, that's going to be tough. But it's Caleb Williams. When he turns it on, he has proven to be really, really dynamic. Next up is the Minnesota Vikings. I think the biggest challenge with Minnesota is Brian Flores, their defensive coordinator, and the pressure looks that he presents. It's one of those outlier teams. I would compare it to like Baltimore on offense, like a really different type of offense. What Brian Flores does with the defense is just really different. He plays tons of man coverage. The pressure schemes, the blitzing is really different. And it's the contrast of massive overload pressure to drop 8, right? Like you're going to have to deal with 6, 7, 8 rushers. And the next thing you know, it's going to look like you're going to deal with 6, 7, 8 rushers and they're really dropping 8. And he just puts a lot on you. And when quarterbacks have a beat on Flores, they kill him, right? Like there are a few games every year where the quarterback is just dialed in and Flores makes, he pays for the aggressive calls that he makes. But there's a lot of games where that doesn't happen and that quarterback looks like Josh Allen against the Houston Texans, right? So the onus to me is on Josh Allen. Joe Brady will have a good scheme, right? It'll be a defensible scheme for handling pressure looks. Does Josh do the smart right thing with the football and give this offense the best opportunity to stay on schedule and then pick your spots to be aggressive? The last team, the Green Bay Packers. I think a good quarterback in Jordan Love. They got some dynamic weapons and Watson and Tucker Kraft. Good back in Aaron Jones. I think it's Micah Parsons. And he's got to come back healthy, all that, right? But there's nobody like him. There's a lot of people that want to be like Micah Parsons, and I think he's helped a lot of guys get drafted higher than they should. But the way that he's moved around, the way that he can threaten interior gaps, it's unlike anything the Bills have seen. And obviously the Bills will have a new starter at left guard. I think Osiris Torrance is a good player, but Micah Parsons is exactly the type of player I think would give him fits. Connor McGovern's a good center. Probably had some practice time, I guess, against Micah Parsons. But I think he stresses pass pro schemes in ways that no other player really can because of his versatility and then the skill set, right? There's nobody that's as explosive as Bendy and as versatile with how they're deployed rushing the passer. And so I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, especially going on the road in Green Bay. So the onus is on protection schemes, particularly on the interior offensive line. I think that's really where you're stressed in some unique ways. All right, folks, so there you have it. Went through all 14 of the Bills' opponents. We identified the biggest challenge they present. We also identified what function of the Bills was responsible for dealing with it. I'm excited for this schedule. We'll have at least one more kind of schedule primer conversation where I want to get into the quarterbacks. I want to talk about what quarterbacks the Bills are facing, which ones are the most challenging, which one I think the Bills can have some success with. We'll break that all down for you here very soon, and then we'll get that schedule on Thursday and break that all down as well. So, look, Bills discussions every day here on Locked On Bills all year long. So much great content planned for the summer. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. I'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.